They thought because I was 72 years old, I would just sit on my porch and drink sweet tea while they dismantled my life. They looked at my gray hair and my walking cane, and they saw a victim. They forgot that I am Elara Calloway. I spent 50 years extracting the essence of poisonous flowers to create the world's most expensive perfumes. I know exactly how to handle toxic things. Today, they sent a wolf to my door, thinking I was a sheep. But they are about to learn that the old woman in the big house is the most dangerous predator in the forest. Savannah in August is not just a city, it is a fever. The humidity hangs so heavy, you feel like you are walking through warm soup, and the Spanish moss drapes over the oak trees like the gray rags of ghosts. I stood on the veranda of Calloway Manor and looked out at my garden. To anyone else, it was a paradise of blooming jasmine and wild magnolia. But to me, it was a silent movie. 5 years ago, I woke up with a bad flu, and when the fever broke, it took my world with it. Anosmia. That is the clinical word for it. I call it the Great Silence. I am a master perfumer. I was known as the nose of the South. My nose earned millions of dollars and built this estate. And now, I cannot smell the coffee in my cup, or the rain on the pavement, or the smoke of a fire. I have told no one. Not my banker, not my lawyer, and certainly not the vultures waiting for me to retire. I navigate my life by memory. I know the jasmine blooms in late spring, so I mention its sweetness to visitors. I know the coffee burns if I leave it too long, so I watch the steam. I have become a master of pretending. I gripped the wooden railing of the porch. The paint was peeling under my fingers. The estate was crumbling around me just like my bank account. Keeping this house running cost a fortune I no longer had. But I would die before I let it go. This house was the only thing holding my memories together. Then I saw it. A sleek black car turned into the long gravel driveway. It looked out of place among the ancient oaks, like a spaceship landing in a cemetery. The car crunched over the gravel and came to a stop right in front of the peeling white steps. My stomach tightened. I knew that car. The driver opened the back door and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a white silk suit that probably cost more than my roof repairs. Her heels were sharp enough to puncture a tire. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it pulled the skin of her face into a permanent sneer. Sienna Vane. 30 years ago, she was my assistant. She washed my beakers and swept the floors of my lab. I taught her everything I knew about the chemistry of scent. I thought of her as a daughter. Then she stole my client list, stole my suppliers, and started a synthetic fragrance company that flooded the market with cheap chemical water. She became a billionaire. I became a recluse. She looked up at me on the porch and adjusted her sunglasses. She did not smile. Elara, she called out. Her voice was sharp and metallic. You look tired. I straightened my back and leaned on my cane. I pulled my shoulders back the way my mother taught me. I am perfectly fine, Sienna, I said. My voice was steady. To what do I owe the displeasure of this visit? She walked up the steps, the click of her heels echoing like gunshots. She stopped 2 steps below me, so she had to look up. It was a power play, but I had the high ground. I am not here to fight Elara, she said. I am here to save you. I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. Save me, like you saved the Parker account, or like you saved my formula for the Summer Rose collection? You are a thief, Sienna. You do not save things. You consume them. She sighed and reached into her expensive leather bag. She pulled out a thick envelope and held it out to me. Open it, she said. I did not move. I stared at the envelope. It is an eviction notice, Elara, she said quietly. Or rather, a foreclosure warning. My sources tell me you have not paid property taxes in 2 years. The bank is moving to seize Calloway Manor on Monday. My heart hammered against my ribs. She knew. How did she know? I can make it go away, she continued. I bought the debt this morning. I own the mortgage now. I can wipe the slate clean. You can live here until you die. All expenses paid. I looked at her cold blue eyes. I knew there was a price. Sienna never gave anything away for free. And what do you want in exchange? I asked. She smiled, and it was a terrifying sight. I want the journal, she said. I want the formula for the midnight orchid. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. The midnight orchid was a myth, a legend, a perfume I created 40 years ago in a moment of passion and madness. It was too dangerous to release. It did not just smell good. It altered the mind. It made people remember things they wanted to forget. I had hidden the formula where no one would ever find it. I do not know what you are talking about, I lied. Do not play games with me, old woman, she hissed, stepping closer. I know you have it. Give me the formula and you keep your house. Refuse, and I will have the sheriff here in an hour to throw you and your antique furniture onto the street. She placed the envelope on the railing next to my hand. You have 24 hours, Elara. Think about it. She turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the humid air. I could not smell the dust, but I could taste the fear. I watched the black car disappear until it was just a speck of darkness against the green tree line. The dust it kicked up settled on my skin. I wiped my cheek and looked at the residue on my fingertips. It was gritty and gray. That is what Sienna Vane left behind everywhere she went. Grit and gray ash. I picked up the envelope she had left on the railing. It felt heavy in my hand, like a brick of lead. I did not need to open it to know what was inside. I knew my finances were a disaster. When you cannot smell, you cannot create new perfumes. And when you cannot create, you cannot sell. I had been living off the royalties of my old creations for 5 years. But even those were drying up. I walked back into the house. The air inside was cooler, but it felt stagnant. I ran my hand along the hallway wall, feeling the velvet wallpaper that was starting to peel at the corners. This house was my body. The plumbing was my veins, and the electrical wiring was my nervous system. And right now, we were both failing. I needed to find Desmond. I walked through the long corridor to the back of the house where the glass conservatory stood. This was my sanctuary, the greenhouse. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, filled with the rarest botanicals in North America. Desmond Thorne was on his knees in the dirt, pruning a massive patch of night-blooming jasmine. He was 75 years old with hands like tree roots and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He was the only person in the world who knew my secret. Desmond, I said softly. He did not look up. He just clipped a dead leaf with a sharp snap of his shears. I saw the car. Elara, he said. His voice was a low rumble like distant thunder. That was her, was it not? I nodded even though his back was turned. She wants the orchid, Desmond. She knows about the debts. She bought the mortgage. She says she will take the house if I do not give her the formula. Desmond finally stopped clipping. He stood up slowly, his joints popping. He wiped his hands on his canvas apron and turned to face me. His eyes were dark and worried. The orchid, he repeated. That formula is a curse, Elara. You know that. We buried that secret for a reason. I walked over to a table filled with glass beakers and empty vials. I picked one up, feeling the cold, smooth glass. She is going to take everything, Desmond. My home. My lab. This greenhouse. Where will you go? Where will I go? Desmond walked over and took the vial from my trembling hand. He placed it back on the table. We will figure it out, he said firmly, but you cannot give her that formula. You remember what happened last time. You remember the effect it had. I closed my eyes. I remembered. The midnight orchid was not just a perfume. It was a weapon of nostalgia. I had synthesized a molecule from a rare orchid that only bloomed once every decade. When I tested it on myself 40 years ago, I was catatonic for 3 days, lost in a memory of my childhood so vivid, I forgot to eat or drink. It was addictive. It was dangerous. If Sienna got her hands on it, she would not just sell perfume. She would sell an escape from reality. And the world would burn itself down just to get a whiff. I cannot give it to her, I whispered. But I do not have the money to fight her. Desmond put a heavy hand on my shoulder. Then we fight her another way, he said. We stall. We lie. We protect the legacy. I looked at him and felt a surge of gratitude. Desmond had been my gardener for 30 years. He had been my friend for longer. When I lost my smell, he became my nose. He would describe the scents of the flowers to me in such detail that I could almost hallucinate them. Suddenly, a loud mechanical clank echoed through the greenhouse. It sounded like metal grinding on metal. Then came a hiss. I jumped. What was that? Desmond frowned. He looked up at the intricate system of pipes that ran along the glass ceiling. These pipes controlled the humidity and the irrigation. He walked quickly to the pressure gauge on the wall. He tapped the glass face of the dial. That is odd, he muttered. The pressure is dropping. Rapidly. I followed him, my cane clicking on the stone floor. What does that mean? He turned the valve for the misting system. Usually a fine spray of water would hiss out to coat the tropical ferns, but today, nothing came out. Just a dry cough of air. The water, he said. The main line has been shut off. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Shut off. How? We have a private well. Desmond looked at me, and his face was grim. The pump is at the edge of the property, Elara, down by the main gate, where the black car was parked. I gasped. Sienna. She was not waiting 24 hours. She was starting the war right now. Without water, these plants will be dead in 2 days, Desmond said, looking around at the thousands of dollars worth of rare flora. The heat in here will cook them alive. I gripped my cane until my knuckles turned white. This was her first strike. She was going to kill my garden, my raw materials, my livelihood. She was trying to panic me. She wants me to run to her, I said, my voice shaking with rage. She wants me to beg. I turned and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Desmond asked. I am going to check the safe, I said. I need to make sure the journals are secure. If she is bold enough to cut my water, she is bold enough to break into my house. I left the greenhouse and marched back into the main house. The silence of the hallway felt different now. It felt hostile. I walked to the library. The hidden safe was behind a portrait of my grandfather. I reached for the frame to swing it open, but then I froze. The portrait was crooked. Just an inch. Just a tiny tilt to the left. But I knew this house. I knew every angle. I had dusted that frame yesterday. It had been straight. Someone had been in here. I did not breathe. I stood in the center of the library listening. Was she still here? Was one of her hired goons standing in the shadows watching me? I gripped my cane like a club. "Come out," I whispered into the gloom. But the only answer was the creaking of the old house settling into the heat. The war had begun, and the enemy was already inside the walls. I stood in the library and stared at the crooked portrait of my grandfather. My heart was beating so hard I could feel the pulse in my fingertips. I reached out and swung the heavy frame away from the wall. The steel safe was still there. The dial was set exactly how I left it. They had not taken the midnight orchid formula. Not yet. But the message was clear. The crooked picture was a calling card. It meant we can get in here whenever we want. It meant you are not safe. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the wicker chair on the porch with my shotgun across my lap, waiting for a sound that never came. But the real attack did not come with noise. It came with silence and heat. The next morning, the sun rose like a hammer. By 10 o'clock, the temperature in Savannah had hit 90 degrees. Without the cooling mist of the water system, the glass conservatory turned into an oven. I walked into the greenhouse, and the air was so thick it felt solid. The humidity was gone, replaced by a dry, scorching heat. My prize orchids were already drooping. The tips of the ferns were turning brown and curling like burning paper. Desmond was dragging buckets of water from the kitchen sink. His shirt soaked through with sweat. He looked exhausted. "The pump is smashed, Elara," he said, wiping his forehead with a dirty rag. "It was not an accident. Someone took a sledgehammer to the main valve. It will take a week to get the parts to fix it." A week. In a week, everything in here would be dead. "We do not have a week, Desmond," I said. "We have hours." Suddenly, I saw a white city van pull up the driveway. It parked right behind where Sienna's black car had been the day before. A man in a beige uniform stepped out holding a clipboard. He had a round, sweaty face, and he looked like he enjoyed bad news. He walked straight to the open door of the greenhouse. He did not knock. "Elara Calloway," he asked. "I am Ms. Calloway." I corrected him, gripping my cane. "And you are trespassing. I am Inspector Gantry from the City Health and Safety Department," he said, tapping his clipboard with a pen. "We received an anonymous complaint this morning." Of course they did. Sienna moved fast. "What kind of complaint?" I asked. "Sanitation hazard," he said. "Neighbors reported a foul odor coming from your property. The smell of rotting vegetation and chemical waste. A public nuisance." I froze. I looked at Desmond. He went still, holding the bucket of water. "There is no smell," I said, keeping my face neutral. "Just the smell of heat and soil." The inspector crinkled his nose and made a show of sniffing the air. "I beg to differ, Ms. Calloway," he said. "It smells like something died in here. I can smell the decomposition from the driveway." I felt a wave of panic. Was he telling the truth? The plants were dying fast in this heat. Were they already rotting? I took a deep breath through my nose. Nothing. Just the same blank, empty air I had smelled for 5 years. If he realized I could not smell the rot, he would put it in his report. If the court found out I was physically compromised, they could declare me unfit to manage the estate. Sienna would use that to force a conservatorship. She would take control of everything, including the formula. I had to bluff. I stepped closer to him. I looked him dead in the eye. "You are mistaken, Inspector," I said firmly. "What you are smelling is the Amorphophallus titanium, the corpse flower." Desmond looked at me sharply. We did not have a corpse flower. It was a lie. The inspector blinked. The what? It is a rare specimen, I lied, my voice smooth and confident. It blooms once every 7 years and emits a pungent odor of decay to attract pollinators. It is not rot, Inspector. It is botany. It is worth $50,000. Would you like to see it? I gestured toward a dense patch of large jungle ferns in the back corner. It was dark and shadowed there. The inspector hesitated. He looked at the dark corner and then back at the dying orchids near the door. The heat was making him sweat profusely. He did not want to go digging through the jungle. He sniffed the air again. He looked unsure now. The power of suggestion is a strong thing. If you tell someone something is expensive and rare, they start to respect it even if it smells like garbage. Fine, he grunted, making a note on his clipboard. But you need to get this water situation fixed. If the smell gets worse, I will have to condemn the structure. You have 48 hours to restore the irrigation, or I'm shutting this greenhouse down. He turned and walked back to his van. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. My knees felt weak. Desmond dropped the bucket. It clattered loudly on the stone floor. That was dangerous, Elara, he said quietly. You lied to a city official. I looked at my dying garden. I bought us time, Desmond. He gave us 48 hours. Desmond shook his head. We cannot fix the pump in 48 hours, and we cannot carry enough buckets to save all these plants. Sienna wins either way. I looked at the brown edges of the jasmine. I felt a cold anger rising in my chest. It was colder than the fear. No, I said. She wants to play dirty. She wants to use the city against me. I turned to Desmond. Get the truck. Desmond, we are going to town. He looked confused. Town? What for? I smiled, but there was no humor in it. If she wants a smell, I said I will give her a smell. She wants to talk about chemical waste. Let us go to the hardware store. I have a chemistry degree and I remember how to make a stink bomb that will clear out a city block. Desmond stared at me for a moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. You are going to strike back? He asked. I gripped my cane and started walking toward the house. I am done being the victim, Desmond. If she wants to burn my house down, I am going to make sure she chokes on the smoke. The truck rattled down the highway toward Savannah, and the vibration hummed through the soles of my shoes. Desmond drove in silence. He knew better than to talk to me when I was in my own head. The air conditioning in the old Ford had broken years ago, so the windows were down, letting in the hot wind that smelled of asphalt and pine resin. Or at least I assumed it did. To me, it was just hot air hitting my face. As we drove, my mind drifted back 40 years. Back to a different heat. Back to the night I created the monster. It was 1985. I was young and arrogant, and I was in love. His name was Gabriel. He was a photographer with eyes the color of sea glass and a laugh that made you want to tell him all your secrets. But Gabriel was restless. He was leaving for an assignment in a war zone across the ocean, and I was terrified he would never come back. Or worse, that he would come back different. I wanted to freeze time. I wanted to bottle the feeling of lying in bed with him on a Sunday morning. So I went to my lab. I had a specimen of Dendrophylax lindeni, the ghost orchid. It is an elusive flower that grows in the swamps and has no leaves, just roots, and a white blossom that looks like a floating spirit. It has a scent that is almost impossible to capture because the chemical compounds break down the moment they touch the air. I spent 3 weeks awake. I barely ate. I used a cold enfleurage technique, pressing the petals into layers of purified fat to extract the oil without heat. I mixed it with ambergris and a drop of pure vetiver. When I finally distilled the essence, it was 3 in the morning. The liquid in the vial was not gold or clear. It was a deep violet blue, like the sky just before dawn. I put a single drop on my wrist. I did not just smell Gabriel. I became him. I was suddenly transported back to a beach in Charleston, where we had walked in the rain. I could feel the cold sand. I could taste the salt on his skin. I could hear the exact pitch of the seagulls. The memory was not a memory. It was a hallucination. It was total immersion. I sat in that chair for 3 days. I did not move. I did not drink water. I was trapped in the perfect loop of the past. If Desmond had not found me and dragged me into a cold shower, I would have died in that chair with a smile on my face. That is why I hid the formula. The midnight orchid is not a perfume. It is a prison. It makes the real world unbearable because the past smells so much sweeter. If Sienna Vane releases that scent, she will create a world of addicts. People will stop living their lives just to chase the ghost of their memories. The truck hit a pothole and I jerked back to the present. The nostalgia vanished, leaving the bitter taste of reality in my mouth. We were in the city now. The streets of Savannah were crowded with tourists. Desmond pulled the truck into a spot across from the hardware store. "Stay here, Elara," he said, turning off the engine. "I will go in and get the supplies. We need sulfur and ammonia if we are going to make that stink bomb." I nodded, but my eyes were drawn to the cafe across the street. It was a trendy place with outdoor seating under striped umbrellas. "Wait, Desmond," I whispered. I grabbed his arm. "Look, over there." Desmond followed my gaze. At a corner table sat 2 people. One was a woman in a white silk suit, holding a glass of iced tea. Sienna Vane. Sitting across from her was a man in a beige uniform, wiping sweat from his round face with a napkin. Inspector Gantry, the man who had just threatened to condemn my greenhouse. They were not arguing. They were not discussing city code. They were laughing. I watched as Sienna reached into her purse. She pulled out a thick white envelope. It looked exactly like the one she had tried to give me yesterday. She slid it across the metal table. Inspector Gantry did not open it. He just placed his hand over it and slid it quickly into his clipboard. He smiled a greasy, satisfied smile. My blood ran cold. It was not a random inspection. It was a transaction. Sienna had bought the city government. She had paid him to shut off my water. She had paid him to threaten me. The corruption went deeper than I thought. If I went to the police, they would probably call Sienna before they even took my statement. She owned the narrative. She owned the debt. And now she owned the law. Desmond saw it too. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles cracked. "That son of a bitch," he growled. "We should go over there and confront them." "No," I said sharply. I sat back in the seat, my mind racing. "If we confront them, they will deny it," I said. It is her word against ours. And she is a billionaire, and we are 2 old people in a rusted truck. We cannot win a direct fight, Desmond. "Then what do we do?" he asked. "We cannot just let them get away with it." I looked at the hardware store. Then I looked back at the corrupt inspector and the thief who wanted my legacy. "We stick to the plan," I said, my voice hard. "Go get the chemicals, Desmond. Buy twice as much as we discussed." "Why twice as much?" he asked. I watched Sienna stand up and shake the inspector's hand. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Because," I said, "I am not just going to stink up the greenhouse to fool the inspector. I have a better idea. Sienna is hosting a gala on Saturday night to celebrate her company's anniversary. All the press will be there." Desmond looked at me, and a slow realization dawned in his eyes. "Elara," he warned, "that is a black tie event." I I smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Exactly, I said. And I think it is time the world smelled exactly what kind of rot lies beneath Sienna Vane's empire. Go get the sulfur, Desmond. We have a party to crash. Saturday night arrived wrapped in velvet and dread. I stood in front of the dusty mirror in my dressing room, fastening the pearls that my grandmother had worn to meet the queen. My hands were shaking just a little. I had not worn a formal gown in a decade. The black silk dress hung a little looser on my frame than it used to, but it still had the structure of armor. That is what this was. I was not dressing for a party. I was dressing for battle. The invitation had arrived by courier that morning. It was printed on heavy cream paper, embossed with gold leaf. The Vane Corporation Annual Gala, honoring the legacy of Elara Calloway. It was a trap, of course. Sienna did not want to honor me. She wanted to display me. She wanted to trot me out like a prize poodle to show the world that she had conquered the old guard. If I refused to go, I looked weak and bitter. If I went, I walked straight into her territory. But I had the element of surprise. Or at least, I hoped I did. I walked down the stairs where Desmond was waiting. He was wearing a tuxedo that smelled of mothballs, though I only knew that because he had apologized for it earlier. He looked uncomfortable but determined. He had the chemical vials tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. "We are ready, Elara," he said, offering me his arm. We drove to the Grand Savannah Hotel in silence. The valet parking line was a parade of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. When we stepped out, cameras flashed like lightning. I blinked against the glare, forcing a smile onto my face. I remembered how to do this. Chin up, shoulders back, walk as if you own the pavement. The ballroom was a sea of noise and color. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, dripping light onto the crowd. The room was filled with the elite of the fragrance industry. Buyers from Paris, chemists from Geneva, fashion editors from New York. They held champagne flutes and laughed with their heads thrown back. As we walked in, the crowd parted. They recognized me. Or maybe they just recognized the ghost of who I used to be. I saw the whispers ripple through the room. "Is that her? Is that the nose?" I scanned the room for Sienna. I found her instantly. She was standing on a raised platform in the center of the room, wearing a dress made of red sequins that looked like fresh blood. She was holding a microphone. She saw me. Her smile widened, but it did not reach her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice booming through the speakers. "Please welcome the woman of the hour, my mentor, the legend, Ms. Elara Calloway." A spotlight hit me. I was blinded for a second. The applause was polite but hesitant. I felt exposed. Sienna motioned for me to join her on the platform. I tightened my grip on my cane and walked forward. Desmond tried to follow, but a security guard stepped in his path, blocking him. I was on my own. I climbed the stairs to the stage. Sienna kissed me on both cheeks. Her skin felt cold and dry. "I am so glad you came, Elara," she whispered into my ear, so only I could hear. "I thought you might be too fragile for a night like this." I pulled away and smiled at the crowd. "I am made of sterner stuff than you think, Sienna," I said into the microphone. The crowd laughed politely. Sienna laughed too, but her jaw was tight. "We have a special surprise tonight," she announced to the room. "As you all know, Elara Calloway has the most famous nose in history. She can identify a single drop of rose oil in a vat of vinegar." My stomach dropped. I knew where this was going. "We have been debating a new acquisition," she continued. A very rare, very complex vintage oil found in an ancient apothecary in Cairo. My chemists are stumped. They cannot identify the keynote. So I thought, why not ask the master? She gestured to an assistant who walked onto the stage carrying a small velvet pillow. On the pillow sat a crystal decanter filled with a golden liquid. Sienna picked up the bottle. She removed the stopper. "Would you do us the honor, Elara?" she said, holding the bottle out to me. "Tell us what is in the base note. Prove to us that you are still the queen of scent." The room went silent. 500 people held their breath. This was it. The execution. If I sniffed the bottle and said nothing, everyone would know I had lost my gift. My reputation would be destroyed. The investors would lose faith in my brand, and the value of my estate would plummet, making the foreclosure inevitable. Sienna would win, but if I guessed and got it wrong, it would be even worse. A public humiliation. I looked at the bottle. It was just a few inches from my face. I inhaled deeply, hoping for a miracle. Hoping that maybe just this once my nerves would fire and the signal would reach my brain. Nothing. Just the sensation of air moving through my nostrils. No sweetness, no spice, no musk. It was as blank as a glass of water. I looked at Sienna. She was watching me with a predatory gleam in her eyes. She knew. She must have known all along. This was not a test. It was a reveal. "Well, Elara," she prompted, holding the microphone to my mouth. "What do you smell? Is it sandalwood? Is it oud? Or is it just old age?" The silence stretched out. It was heavy and suffocating. I could feel the heat of the spotlight burning my skin. I looked out into the darkness of the crowd, searching for Desmond. I needed a lifeline, but I could not see him. The lights were too bright. I was blind. I was deaf to the sense of the world, and now I was about to be stripped naked in front of the people I had ruled for 40 years. I reached out and took the bottle from her hand. My fingers were cold. I brought the crystal rim to my nose again. I closed my eyes. I had to think. I had to find a way out. Then I opened my eyes and looked at the liquid. Really looked at it. It was viscous. It clung to the glass. It had a slight greenish tint in the gold. Sienna leaned in. "We are waiting, Elara," she whispered. The bottle felt heavy in my hand. The golden liquid inside swirled like molten honey. I looked out at the faces in the crowd. They were a blur of expectant eyes and glittering jewelry. They wanted a show. They wanted to see the great Elara Calloway fall from grace. Sienna was tapping her foot impatiently. The sound echoed through the microphone like a ticking clock. "Well, Elara," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Is it too difficult? Has your palate evolved?" I took a deep breath. I had to get out of the spotlight. It was blinding me. "I am just admiring the oxidation, Sienna," I said, my voice calm, despite the panic in my chest. "You know that light damages vintage oils. You should not have this under a spotlight. It is amateurish." I stepped sideways, moving out of the harsh white beam and into the shadows at the edge of the stage. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. I had insulted her. Good. It bought me 10 seconds. From the edge of the stage, I could finally see the front row. And there, standing just behind the velvet rope, was Desmond. The security guard was still blocking his path, but Desmond was close enough. He was only 10 feet away. The bottle was open, and the scent must have been wafting down to the front row. Desmond had a nose almost as good as mine. He had spent 40 years smelling the difference between damp earth and dry earth. I locked eyes with him. I kept my face impassive. Desmond did not wave. He did not shout. He simply adjusted his bow tie. He tapped the black silk twice with his index finger. That was our code, developed years ago for silent communication across crowded auction rooms. The tie meant wood, heavy wood, agar wood, or oud. Then he smoothed his hand over his bald head. Leather. Old, worn leather. Finally, he touched the corner of his eye. Something sharp. Something stinging. Civet. Or musk. I looked back at the bottle. Viscous. Greenish gold. It all made sense. It was not just an Egyptian oil. It was a Kefi base, but a heavy predatory version. I turned back to Sienna. I walked into the spotlight again, but this time, I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator. It is interesting, Sienna, I said, holding the bottle up to the light. You called this a rare vintage, but you neglected to mention its history. Sienna frowned. She looked unsure for the first time. I lowered the bottle and looked directly into the camera lens that was broadcasting my face to the giant screens behind us. The top note is gone, I said confidently. Evaporated years ago. What is left is the heart. I smell a very specific agar wood, Cambodian, I believe, roughly 50 years old. The crowd gasped softly. I saw a few heads nod. I continued walking around Sienna, circling her. But beneath the wood there is something animalistic. Russian leather, cured with birch tar. It is heavy, masculine. Sienna's smile was frozen on her face. She looked at the bottle, then back at me. And finally I said, leaning in close to her microphone so my whisper boomed through the hall. Civet. The glandular secretion of the civet cat. Pungent. Musky. And when it is this old, it smells almost like betrayal. I shoved the bottle back into her hands. It is Liqueur Nocturne, 1972, I declared. A clumsy blend. All bass notes and no soul. Much like this party. For a second, there was total silence. Then a man in the back started clapping. It was the French buyer from Chanel. Then another joined in. Then the whole room erupted into applause. Sienna stood there stunned. Her face went pale beneath her makeup. She had set a trap and I had just walked through it and slapped her with the truth. She gripped the microphone, her knuckles white. Remarkable, she choked out. Truly, remarkable. I did not wait for her to dismiss me. I turned and walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me this time with genuine respect. I found Desmond near the exit. He was sweating, but he gave me a tiny, almost invisible nod. We need to leave, I whispered, grabbing his arm. Now. Why, he asked. You won. Look at them. They love you again. I gripped his arm tighter. I won the battle, Desmond. But I just humiliated a narcissist in front of her entire world. She is not going to let us walk out of here. She is going to come for us. And this time, she will not use a lawyer. We pushed through the heavy double doors and out into the cool night air. The valet brought the truck around. It looked ridiculous next to the limousines, but I did not care. As we climbed in, I looked back at the hotel entrance. I saw Sienna's head of security speaking into an earpiece, his eyes scanning the parking lot. He spotted us. He started running toward the truck. Drive, Desmond, I shouted. Drive! Desmond slammed his foot on the gas. The old truck roared and sputtered, then lurched forward. We peeled out of the lot just as the security guard reached the curb. I looked in the side mirror. The guard was talking into his radio. A black SUV pulled out from the VIP lane and turned on its headlights. They are following us, Desmond said, his voice grim. I looked at the chemical vials in his jacket pocket. Good, I said. Head for the estate. If they want to come to my house, let them come. I have a surprise waiting for them in the greenhouse. The headlights of the SUV burned into the rearview mirror, blinding us. We were tearing down the old marsh road, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt that wound through the swamps surrounding Savannah. Desmond was wrestling the steering wheel of the truck, the suspension groaning with every pothole. "They are gaining on us, Elara," he shouted over the roar of the engine. I looked back. The black vehicle was sleek and fast. It was built for pursuit. Our truck was built for hauling manure. We were not going to outrun them. "Turn off the headlights," I said. Desmond glanced at me as if I were crazy. "It is pitch black out there, Elara. We will drive into the swamp." "Do it," I commanded. "You know this road better than anyone. You know every curve by heart. They do not." Desmond hesitated for a split second, then he reached for the knob on the dashboard. The world plunged into total darkness. The truck vanished into the night. We heard the SUV behind us screech. They slammed on their brakes, confused by our sudden disappearance. Desmond kept driving, staring intently at the faint outline of the trees against the starry sky. He navigated the sharp left turn at Miller's Creek by instinct. Behind us, we heard the crunch of tires on gravel and a loud splash. The SUV had missed the turn and slid into the shallow ditch. We did not stop to check on them. We drove the rest of the way to the estate in the dark, the silence of the swamp heavy around us. When we pulled up to the manor, the house looked like a giant sleeping beast, but I knew it would not be sleeping for long. Sienna would not stop because her hired goons drove into a ditch. She would send more. She would send professionals. "We need to barricade the doors," Desmond said, jumping out of the truck. "No," I said, climbing down slowly. My adrenaline was fading and my knees ached. "If we barricade the doors, they will just burn the house down to get us out. We have to let them in." Desmond stopped. "Let them in? Are you insane?" I walked up the steps and unlocked the front door. "They want the journal, Desmond. If they do not find it, they will keep coming. They will tear the walls down. They will hurt you. I need to give them what they want." I went straight to the library. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out an old leather-bound ledger. It looked identical to my real lab notes. The spine was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. I had prepared this book 3 years ago, just in case. It was full of chemical formulas, but they were nonsense. Complex equations that resulted in nothing but brown sludge. It looked real enough to fool a thief, but it would confuse a chemist for months. I opened the safe behind the portrait. I took out the real journal, the one containing the midnight orchid, and slipped it into the waistband of my skirt. Then I placed the decoy book inside the safe and closed the heavy steel door. I spun the dial. "Now we wait," I said. I sat in the high-backed velvet chair in the corner of the library. I rested my shotgun across my lap. Desmond stood by the window, watching the driveway. It was 2 a.m. when they came. There were no headlights this time, just the sound of footsteps on the porch. Soft rubber soles. Professional. I heard the lock on the front door click. They picked it in under 10 seconds. Desmond stiffened. I put a finger to my lips. We listened as they moved through the house. They did not check the kitchen. They did not check the bedrooms. They knew exactly where to go. Sienna must have remembered the layout of the house from 30 years ago. The library door creaked open. 2 beams of light cut through the darkness. Flashlights. I sat perfectly still in the shadows. I was part of the furniture. The 2 men moved quickly to the portrait. They knew. They swung the frame aside, and one of them pulled a stethoscope from his pocket. He pressed it against the safe door and began to turn the dial. It took them 5 minutes to crack it. The safe clicked, and the door swung open. "Got it," one of them whispered. He reached in and grabbed the decoy journal. He held it up, and the beam of his flashlight caught the gold lettering on the spine. Calloway, 1985. "Check it," the other man said. Make sure it is the right one. The first man flipped it open. He scanned the pages of complex diagrams and handwritten notes. It looks real, he said. Carbon chains. Distillation temps. This is it. They laughed. A low, triumphant sound. That was my cue. I racked the slide of the shotgun. Check, check. The sound was louder than a cannon in the quiet room. Both men spun around, dropping their flashlights. The beams rolled across the floor, casting wild, spinning shadows on the ceiling. Gentlemen, I said, my voice calm and cold. I believe you forgot to sign the guest book. They froze. They could not see me clearly, just the barrel of the gun reflecting the light. Put the book down, I said. The man holding the book hesitated. He looked at his partner, then back at the darkness where I sat. We are leaving, lady, his partner said, raising his hands. We do not want any trouble. Then put the book down, I repeated, but I did not aim at them. I aimed slightly to the left at a bust of Beethoven on the mantel. The man with the book tightened his grip. He made a calculation. He realized I was an old woman in a chair. He realized they were close to the door. Run! He shouted. He bolted for the hallway. I pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared. The bust of Beethoven exploded into a cloud of white plaster dust. The noise was deafening. The men screamed and scrambled out the door, slipping on the rug in their panic. I heard them crashing down the hallway, their boots thumping against the floorboards. Then the front door slammed, and tires squealed in the driveway. Silence returned to the room. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder. I could not smell it, but I could taste the copper on my tongue. Desmond turned on the lamp. He looked pale. You missed them, he said, looking at the shattered statue. I lowered the gun and rubbed my aching shoulder. I was not aiming at them, Desmond. If I shot them, the police would come. They would take the body and the evidence. I stood up and walked to the empty safe. I wanted them to leave, I said, and I wanted them to take that book. Desmond looked at the empty safe. You let them win, he said softly. I smiled. It was a wicked smile. No, Desmond. I just gave them a map to nowhere. Sienna will spend weeks analyzing those formulas. She will waste millions of dollars trying to recreate a scent that does not exist. And while she is distracted looking down at her microscope, I patted the real journal hidden under my clothes. We are going to burn her empire to the ground. I spent the next morning feeling invincible. I sat in my kitchen drinking tea that tasted like hot water and watching Desmond repair the front door frame. We had won a major victory. Sienna Vane was somewhere in her high-tech laboratory, staring at a book full of nonsense equations, thinking she held the keys to the kingdom. I calculated that it would take her scientists at least a week to realize the chemical chains were impossible. A week was all I needed to move the real assets and find a lawyer who could not be bought. But I underestimated Sienna. I forgot that she was not just a thief. She was a prodigy. I had taught her too well. It was noon when the phone in the hallway rang. It was the old rotary phone that sat on a mahogany table. It rang with a shrill mechanical scream that always made me jump. Desmond stopped hammering. He looked at the phone, then at me. I will get it, I said, setting down my tea. I picked up the receiver. Hello? There was a silence on the other end, then a soft, familiar laugh. Did you really think I was that stupid, Elara? My blood ran cold. It was Sienna. I do not know what you mean, I said, gripping the cord. The journal, she said. It took me exactly 3 hours to realize it was a forgery. You used a bind from 1985, but the paper stock is from 2010. And the formula, on page 6, the molecular weight is off by 0.4 grams. It is a joke. A very funny joke. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. She had seen through it instantly. "You are losing your touch, Sienna," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You used to be more patient." "I am done being patient," she snapped. "I am done playing games with burglars and fake books. I tried to do this the easy way. Now I am going to do it the hard way." She hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like an angry hornet. I put the phone down slowly. Desmond was watching me. He had gone pale. "She knows, Desmond," I whispered. "She knows the book is a fake." Desmond did not answer. He was looking at his cell phone, which was vibrating on the table next to his tools. He picked it up. He looked at the screen and his face went gray. It was the color of old ash. He answered it. "Hello?" he said. His voice was rough. He listened for a long time. I watched him. I saw his shoulders slump. I saw the light go out of his eyes. He looked like a man who had just been shot in the gut but refused to fall down. "I understand," he said finally. Please, do not do that. I will do it." "Yes. Today." He ended the call and put the phone in his pocket. He did not look at me. He started packing his tools into his canvas bag. Hammer, screwdriver, nails. He moved with a slow mechanical rhythm. "Desmond?" I asked, stepping closer. "Who was that?" He zipped the bag shut. He stood up and finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery. "That was Sienna," he said. "Sienna called you." "Why?" Desmond took a deep breath. He looked down at his work boots. "She has Marcus Elara." I froze. Marcus was Desmond's son. A brilliant young lawyer in Atlanta, he was Desmond's pride and joy. "What do you mean she has him?" I asked. "She does not have him physically," Desmond said, his voice shaking. "She has his career. Apparently Marcus made a mistake on a filing for a corporate merger last year. A small error. But Sienna bought the firm he works for this morning. She dug up the error. She says it is enough to get him disbarred, enough to get him charged with fraud." I gasped. She bought a law firm just to blackmail a gardener. The scope of her wealth was terrifying. "She says she will ruin him," Desmond continued. "She will destroy his life. Unless what, Desmond?" He looked at me and I saw the tears spilling over onto his cheeks. "Unless I sign an affidavit," he whispered. "A sworn statement, confirming that you have lost your sense of smell, confirming that you are mentally unfit to run the company." The silence in the hallway was absolute. If he signed that paper, it was over. My credibility would be gone. The banks would foreclose immediately. Sienna would be granted conservatorship over my estate and my archives. She would get the real journal legally. "You cannot do that, Desmond," I said, my voice trembling. "You know that is a lie. I am not mentally unfit." "I know," Desmond choked out. "But I cannot let her destroy my son Elara. He is all I have." He picked up his tool bag. He looked at me with such sorrow that I wanted to look away. "I have to go." "Elara," he said, "I have to go meet her lawyers. I am sorry. I am so sorry." He walked past me. I reached out to grab his arm, but I let my hand drop. What could I say? "Let your son be ruined so I can keep my house." I could not ask him to make that sacrifice. I listened to his heavy boots walking away down the hall. I heard the front door open and close. I heard his truck start up and drive away. I stood there in the hallway of my ancestors. The house was silent. For the first time in 30 years, I was truly alone. I walked into the kitchen. The faucet was dripping. Drip, drip, drip. I could not smell the tea. I could not smell the old wood of the cabinets. I could not smell the fear that was radiating off my own skin. I was a perfumer with no nose, a general with no army. And now I had been betrayed by my only friend. I sank down onto the cold tile floor and pulled my knees to my chest. Sienna Vane had stripped me of everything, but as I sat there staring at the pattern in the tiles, a strange cold calm settled over me. Desmond did what he had to do. He acted out of love. Sienna acted out of greed. She thought she had won. She thought that by isolating me, she had made me weak. But she forgot one thing about me. I do my best work in the dark. I stood up. My knees popped, but I did not care. I walked to the pantry. I pushed aside the jars of pickled peaches and reached into the back where I kept the industrial cleaning supplies. Ammonia, bleach, high-grade solvents. I grabbed a bottle of chlorine. If Desmond was gone, I had no one to be my nose. I had no one to tell me if a mixture was sweet or sour. But I did not need to make perfume anymore. I needed to make poison. The next 2 days were a study in suffocation. I was not physically trapped in my house. The doors were unlocked. The windows were open, but I could not leave. If I stepped foot off the property, I knew Sienna's lawyers would be there to serve me with papers. If I went to the grocery store, I would probably find my credit cards declined. Sienna had drawn a circle around Calloway Manor and tightened it like a noose. The mail slot in the front door became an instrument of torture. Every hour I heard the metallic clack-clack as another envelope was shoved through. Cease and desist orders, foreclosure notices, competency hearing summons. The pile on the floor grew until it looked like a snowdrift of white paper. I stopped answering the phone. I unplugged it from the wall. The silence that followed was heavy. It was just me and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Without Desmond, the house felt enormous. I found myself walking through the rooms, running my hands over the furniture. The velvet of the Victorian sofa, the cold marble of the fireplace, the rough grain of the oak banister. These textures were my friends. They were the only things that felt real. I went into the kitchen to make soup, but I forgot the gas stove was on. I could not smell the gas. I only realized it when I saw the heat shimmering in the air above the burner. I turned it off, my hand shaking. I was dangerous to myself. Desmond was right. Maybe I was unfit. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. I was 72 years old. I was tired. My joints ached. My eyes were failing. Maybe it was time to give up. Maybe I should just sign the papers, take the money, and go live in a condo in Florida where someone else would cut the grass. I closed my eyes and imagined it, a life of bingo and water aerobics, a life of safety. But then I thought of Sienna. I thought of her face on that stage, the arrogance, the way she treated Desmond like a pawn to be removed from the board. She did not care about the art of perfume. She did not care about the history of this house. She wanted the midnight orchid so she could bottle it, sell it, and move on to the next conquest. She would tear down my greenhouse to build a parking lot. No. I opened my eyes. The kitchen was dark, but my mind was clear. I would not go gently. I would not fade away. I stood up and walked to the library. I needed a plan. I could not fight her in court. She had more money. I could not fight her with physical force. She had security teams. I had to fight her with the only weapon I had left, her own greed. Sienna was a perfectionist. She was obsessed with possessing the best, the rarest, the most exclusive things. She did not just want the formula. She wanted the victory. She wanted to look me in the eye and see me broken. I could use that. I walked to the desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I began to write. Not a legal defense, not a letter to the editor. I wrote a list of ingredients. It was a formula, but it was not the midnight orchid. I worked for hours. My memory for chemical compounds was still sharp, even if my nose was dead. I combined the molecular structure of scatol, which gives feces its smell, with butyric acid, which smells of rancid butter. I masked them under a heavy layer of ionones, which smell of sweet violets. To a novice, it would smell like flowers. But once it touched the skin, once the body heat warmed the oils, the violets would evaporate in seconds. And what would be left would be a stench so powerful, so clinging, it would take weeks to scrub off. It would stain the skin blue. It was a chemical mark of shame. I looked at the formula. It was nasty. It was petty. It was perfect. I plugged the phone back into the wall. I dialed Sienna's private number. I knew she would answer. She was waiting for this call. It rang twice. "Elara," she said. Her voice was smooth like silk over steel. "I was wondering when you would call." I let my voice crack. I made myself sound old and defeated. "You win, Sienna," I whispered into the receiver. "I cannot do this anymore. The lawyers, the debts. It is too much." There was a pause. I could hear her smiling. "I am glad you are being reasonable, Elara," she said. "It is for the best." "I want to make a deal," I said, sniffing loudly to fake a sob. "I will give you the journal, the real one, the midnight orchid. But I want the house. You have to sign over the deed to me free and clear, and you have to leave Desmond alone." "Done," she said instantly. "I will have the papers drawn up within the hour." "No lawyers," I said sharply. "Just you. Come to the house tomorrow at noon. Bring the deed. I will give you the formula." She hesitated. She was suspicious. "Why no lawyers, Elara?" "Because I lied, my voice trembling. I do not want anyone to see me like this. I do not want witnesses to my surrender. Just you and me. One last time." She bought it. Her ego would not let her believe anything else. She wanted to see me beg. "Tomorrow at noon," she said. "Do not try anything stupid, Elara. My security team will be waiting at the gate." I hung up the phone. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone. I had 18 hours. I went down to the basement where I kept my old distillation equipment. It was dusty and covered in cobwebs. I wiped off the copper alembic. I lit the burner. I began to mix. I could not smell the chemicals as I poured them. I could not smell the sulfur or the acid. But I watched the liquid turn a deep, innocent blue. I watched it bubble and thicken. I was not just brewing a stink bomb. I was brewing a legacy. Sienna Vane wanted the scent of the century. I was going to give her something she would never forget. The basement of Calloway Manor was where my father taught me the difference between a poison and a cure. He used to say that the only difference was the dosage. Tonight, I was testing that theory. The copper still hummed softly on the workbench, the flame of the Bunsen burner casting long dancing shadows against the brick walls. I felt like a witch leaning over a cauldron. But there was no magic here. Only chemistry, cold, hard, and unforgiving. I lined up the ingredients on the slate table. To my left was the scatol. In its solid form, it looked like harmless white crystals, but I knew that once dissolved, it carried the potent stench of decay. To my right was the butyric acid. It was a clear liquid that moved like water, but possessed the sour biological odor of vomit. I had to work with extreme precision. Usually, a perfumer relies on their nose to tell them when a mixture is balanced. They sniff the air to check for leaks or spills. I was flying blind. If I spilled a single drop of this concentrate on my clothes, I would not know it until Sienna wrinkled her nose in disgust and walked away. I had to be surgically clean. I pulled on a pair of thick rubber gloves and adjusted my safety goggles. The silence of the basement was absolute. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. First the base. I poured the heavy carrier oil into the beaker. It was thick and golden. Then the active agents. I measured the scatol on a digital scale. 0.4 grams. Too little, and she would not smell it. Too much, and she would smell it immediately before she even touched the bottle. It had to be a time bomb. It had to wait until it warmed on the skin. I tipped the crystals into the oil. I watched them dissolve, swirling into nothingness. Next came the mask. The ionones, the synthetic scent of violets. I poured it in generously. It turned the mixture a deep, luxurious blue, the color of a midnight sky, the color of the real midnight orchid. I stirred the mixture with a glass rod. Clink, clink, clink. I watched the viscosity. It needed to look rich. It needed to drip slowly like liquid velvet. I added a pinch of thickener. I watched it settle. Perfect. I held the beaker up to the light. It was beautiful. It looked like the most expensive perfume ever created. It looked like $1 million. But I knew the chemistry. The violet scent was highly volatile. It would evaporate within seconds of hitting the air, leaving behind only the heavy, clinging base of rot and sulfur. And the blue dye I had added was a stubborn industrial pigment. It would stain whatever it touched for days. I needed a vessel. I went to the cabinet where I kept my antique bottles. I bypassed the modern glass vials. This needed to look legendary. I found it on the top shelf. A hand-blown crystal flacon from the 1920s. It was etched with delicate vines and had a heavy silver stopper. It felt cold and substantial in my hand. It was a bottle fit for a queen or a tyrant. I placed a small glass funnel into the neck of the bottle. My hand trembled slightly. I took a deep breath and steadied my wrist against the table edge. I poured. The blue liquid slid down the funnel and filled the crystal belly of the bottle. I did not spill a drop. I stoppered it immediately and sealed it with a thin layer of wax, just like we did in the old days. It was done. I set the bottle on the table and stepped back. I stripped off my gloves and threw them into the hazardous waste bin. I wiped down the table with alcohol 3 times just to be safe. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 6 in the morning. The sun was coming up. I had not slept. My eyes were burning and my back felt like it was made of rusted iron. But I did not feel tired. I felt electric. I carried the bottle upstairs to the library. The morning light was filtering through the heavy drapes, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I placed the bottle in the center of the mahogany desk. It sat there gleaming in a shaft of sunlight. A beautiful lie. I went to my bedroom to dress. I chose my outfit carefully. I did not want to look like a chemist. I wanted to look like the lady of the manor. I put on a high-collared navy dress that buttoned up to the chin. I pinned my hair back into a severe bun. I applied lipstick, red, war paint. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw the lines around my eyes. I saw the gray in my hair, but I also saw the set of my jaw. It was the same jawline my grandfather had. The jawline of a stubborn Calloway who refused to sell the land even when the Union Army was burning the city. I was ready. I went back downstairs and sat in the high-backed chair behind the desk. I placed my hands on the wood and waited. At exactly 11:55, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. She was early. I did not move. I did not check the window. I just stared at the blue bottle. The doorbell rang. I stood up. I walked to the door. I unlocked it and swung it open. Sienna stood there. She was alone, just as I had asked. She was wearing a trench coat belted at the waist and dark sunglasses. She looked like a spy from a bad movie. "You are early," I said. She pushed past me into the foyer, taking off her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the hallway. "I do not like to wait, Elara," she said. She held up a leather portfolio case. "I have the deed," she said, "and the release forms for Desmond. Everything you asked for." I nodded and closed the door. "The journal is in the library," I said. She smiled, a tight, victorious smile. "Lead the way." I turned and walked down the hall, listening to the click of her heels behind me. It was the sound of a predator closing in on a kill. But she did not know that the trap had already been set, and she was walking right into the jaws of it. The library was silent except for the rustle of paper. Sienna Vane stood on the other side of my mahogany desk, spreading documents out like a general laying out battle maps. She looked powerful. She looked victorious. The sunlight caught the diamond studs in her ears and the gold buttons of her trench coat. She pushed a thick stack of papers toward me. "Here is the deed," she said, tapping the page with a manicured fingernail. "The mortgage has been paid in full. The title is transferred back to your name, effective immediately. And here is the affidavit for Desmond. I have destroyed the evidence against his son. It is over, Elara." I looked at the papers. I picked up my reading glasses and put them on, slowly taking my time. I read every line. I checked every clause. I needed to be sure. "It looks in order," I said, finally looking up over the rim of my glasses. Sienna rolled her eyes. "Of course it is in order. I have the best lawyers in the state. Now give me what I came for." Her eyes drifted to the crystal bottle sitting in the center of the desk. The blue liquid inside glowed like a sapphire. I reached out and placed my hand over the stopper. "This is the only sample in existence," I said, my voice low and serious. "I distilled it 40 years ago. The formula is in my head, but this bottle, this is the proof." Sienna reached out. Her hand was shaking just slightly. "Greed does that to people. It makes them tremble." "Let me see it," she whispered. I slid the bottle across the polished wood. The heavy crystal made a low, rumbling sound. Sienna snatched it up. She held it up to the window, looking at the color. "It is so blue," she murmured. "I expected it to be gold. The indigo root, I lied, smooth as silk. It acts as a preservative for the memory compounds." She nodded, as if she understood. She did not know that indigo root was used for dyeing denim, not perfume. She was so desperate to believe that she swallowed the lie whole. She gripped the silver stopper. "I need to test it," she said. "I need to know it is real before I leave these papers with you." I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. "Be my guest," I said. "But be careful. It is potent. A little goes a long way." She twisted the stopper. It came loose with a soft pop. She brought the bottle to her nose and inhaled deeply. I held my breath. This was the moment of truth. If the chemical mask failed, she would smell the scatole immediately. She would smell the rot, and the game would be over. She closed her eyes. A slow smile spread across her face. "Oh, Elara," she sighed. "It is magnificent. Violets and something else. Something sweet like rain." It worked. The Ionones were doing their job masking the horror beneath. She set the stopper down on the desk. She tipped the bottle against her finger, catching a heavy drop of the blue oil. She dabbed it behind her left ear, then her right. Then she rubbed a generous amount onto her wrists. The dark blue liquid stained her skin, leaving marks that looked like bruises. "It stains," she said, frowning slightly, looking at her blue wrists. "It absorbs quickly," I assured her. "Give it a moment. The heat of your skin activates the heart notes." She nodded, rubbing her wrists together, warming the oil. She looked at me with a triumphant sneer. "You were a fool to keep this hidden, Elara," she said. "This will be the fragrance of the century. I will call it Vane's legacy. I will make millions. And you will sit here in this rotting house with your memories." She reached for the pen to countersign the deed. She scribbled her signature with a flourish. "There," she said, pushing the papers toward me. "The house is yours. The bottle is mine. Pleasure doing business with you." She corked the bottle and dropped it into her leather bag. She turned to leave, but then she stopped. She tilted her head. She sniffed the air. I watched her closely. I saw her nostrils flare. She frowned. She lifted her wrist to her nose again, expecting the sweet scent of violets. Her eyes widened. "What is that?" she whispered. She sniffed her other wrist. Her face went pale. "It smells like garbage." The heat of her skin had burned off the violets. The chemical reaction was complete. The scatol and butyric acid were now screaming. She rubbed her wrist frantically, trying to wipe the blue stain away, but the industrial pigment held fast. The friction only generated more heat, making the smell stronger. "Elara," she gasped, turning back to me. "What is this? It smells like sulfur. It smells like... Oh, God!" She gagged. She actually gagged, covering her mouth with her hand. I stood up slowly. I picked up the deed from the desk. I checked her signature one last time. It was valid. "I believe that is the heart note, Sienna," I said, my voice cold and hard. She stared at me in horror. The smell was radiating off her now, filling the room. Even I could almost imagine the stench based on the way her eyes were watering. "You poisoned me!" she screamed. "I did not poison you," I said calmly, walking around the desk. "I just gave you exactly what you asked for. You wanted my essence, Sienna. You wanted the smell of betrayal. Well, there it is." She clawed at her neck, trying to scrub the oil off her skin. Her fingernails left red scratches, but the blue stain remained. The smell was clinging to her hair, her trench coat, her expensive silk scarf. "Get it off me!" she shrieked. Her voice was high and panicked. "Get it off!" "You cannot wash it off," I said. "That is a long-chain lipid bond. It will stay on your skin for at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. Every time you sweat, every time you take a hot shower, it will only get stronger." She looked at me with wild eyes. She looked at the deed in my hand. She realized what she had done. She had traded a fortune for a bottle of liquid nightmare. "You tricked me," she hissed. "I will sue you. I will burn this house down." "I do not think so," I said. I picked up the phone. "I have Inspector Gantry on speed dial," I said, bluffing one last time. I imagine he would be very interested to know why the CEO of Vane Corporation smells like a hazardous waste dump. Imagine the headlines: "Sienna, the queen of perfume, smells like a sewer." She froze. She knew the press would destroy her. She was trapped. She grabbed her bag, clutching the cursed bottle to her chest. "You are a witch," she spat at me. "A crazy old witch." I smiled. "And you are dismissed." She turned and ran. I heard her heels clacking frantically down the hallway. I heard the front door slam. I walked to the window. I watched her run to her car. She was clawing at her neck, wiping her hands on her coat, desperate to escape her own body. She jumped into the car and peeled out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of dust. I looked down at the papers in my hand. The deed, the affidavit. I had my home back. I had saved Desmond's son. I took a deep breath. The air in the library was probably thick with the stench she left behind. But to me, it was just air. Clean, empty, and free. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the cold tea down the sink. Then I went to the fridge and took out a bottle of champagne. I could not smell the bouquet. I could not taste the notes of pear or citrus. But when I drank it, the bubbles felt like victory. 3 weeks later, I sat on the veranda of Calloway Manor with the morning newspaper spread across my lap. The headline on the business page was bold and satisfying. Vane Corp stock plummets after CEO's bizarre breakdown. The article was delicious. It described how Sienna Vane had missed 3 critical board meetings. When she finally appeared via video conference, she was reportedly wearing a scarf wrapped up to her nose, and her skin still had a faint blue tint. The rumors were wild. Some said she had a rare tropical disease. Others said she had been cursed. But the industry insiders knew the truth. The whispers had started at the country club and spread like wildfire. The great Sienna Vane, the woman who claimed to have the best nose in the business, had fallen for the oldest trick in the book. She had bought a bottle of stink oil and paid a fortune for the privilege. Her reputation for infallibility was shattered. The investors were pulling out. The vultures were circling her now, just as she had circled me. I folded the paper and took a sip of my coffee. I still could not smell the roast, but today it tasted richer. It tasted like freedom. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel. I did not tense up this time. I knew that engine sound. Desmond's old truck rattled up the driveway. He parked in his usual spot. He stepped out carrying a flat of bright purple petunias. He walked up the steps, his boots heavy on the wood. He stopped and looked at me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. There was a lot of history between us, and a lot of pain from the last few weeks. Then he smiled. It was a small, shy smile. "I hear they are calling it the blue flu," he said, his eyes twinkling. I laughed. It felt good to laugh. "She is currently at a private clinic in Switzerland," I said. "Apparently, she is trying an experimental laser treatment to remove the pigment." "But the smell, Desmond? I hear the smell is still lingering." Desmond shook his head, chuckling. "You are a dangerous woman, Elara Calloway. I should have known better than to worry about you." He put the flowers down and sat in the wicker chair opposite me. He looked at the garden, which was slowly coming back to life. The pump had been fixed. The sprinklers were hissing rhythmically in the distance. "Marcus is safe," Desmond said quietly. The investigation was dropped. The new management at the law firm, after Sienna's hostile takeover fell apart, apologized to him. He is going to be partner next year. I reached out and patted his rough hand. "I am glad, Desmond. He is a good boy. He did not deserve to be collateral damage." Desmond looked at me, his expression turning serious. "And the formula, Elara? The real one? Is it safe?" I tapped the side of my head. "It is right here, Desmond. It always was. I burned the journals yesterday. All of them. There is no paper trail anymore. The midnight orchid exists only in my memory." "But your memory," Desmond said gently. "It will not last forever, Elara. We are getting old. If you die, the secret dies with you." I looked out at the greenhouse. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent in there mixing and measuring. I thought about the magic of capturing a feeling in a bottle. Sienna had tried to steal it because she thought it was a commodity. She did not understand that it was an art, and art must be taught, not sold. "Bring Maya," I said. Desmond blinked. "His granddaughter." "Maya. She is 16 now, isn't she?" Desmond nodded. "She is. She is always talking about chemistry. She wins the science fair every year." "Bring her here on Saturday," I said. "I want to see if she has the nose. If she does, I will teach her. I will teach her everything, not just the formulas, but the discipline. I will teach her that perfume is not about vanity. It is about memory." Desmond smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "She would love that, Elara. She would love that very much." He stood up and tipped his cap. "I better get these petunias in the ground before the sun gets too high." I watched him walk down the steps and head toward the garden. My friend. My ally. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. I could not smell the petunias. I could not smell the damp earth or the pine trees. My world was still silent. But as the sun warmed my face, I realized I didn't need to smell the roses to know they were blooming. I could feel them. I could see them. And I knew that long after I was gone, someone else would be here to smell them for me. My legacy was not a formula in a safe. It was not a bank account. It was this house. It was Desmond. And soon, it would be Maya. Sienna Vane had tried to bury me, but she forgot that I am a seed, and now it was time to grow. So that is my story. I would love to hear what you think. Do you think I went too far with the chemical prank, or did Sienna get exactly what she deserved for trying to destroy my family? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in justice served cold, please subscribe to Silver Fox Legacy. Until next time.